So we have Economics chapter 40 today, constraints on goods and developments. Economic factors which constrain growth and development. There are many factors which explain why countries find it hard to move to higher levels of economic development, on which constrain economic growth. Some factors apply particularly to developing countries. Other factors can be relevant for both developed and developing countries. So when we talk about economic constraints or factors, when we talk about constraints, we are simply talking about hindrances that makes it difficult for an economy to reach its full potentials. That's what constraint is about. So one of the factors that might hinder the growth of an economy is commodities. And when we talk about commodities, I'm going to read, then we'll look further. Some developing countries are highly dependent on exports of commodities, while others are highly dependent on imports of commodities. So these commodities range from agricultural products such as rice or soya beans to mineral commodities such as copper or iron, or to fossil fuels such as oil and coal. Dependency is related to the proportion of GDP that is accounted for by commodity exports, the proportion of exports that are commodity exports, and the number of people employed in commodity production. Commodities and natural resources should bring prosperity and increased rates of economic development to countries that are abundant in natural resources. However, there are numbers of reasons why abundance of natural resources might lead to a resource curse. That is where we're going. A resource curse when economic development is limited. So an economy has natural resources, but the natural resources that the economy has led to what we call resource curse. When we talk about resource curse, it's simply talking about a situation that an economy has a full abundance of natural resources, but the abundance of natural resources is not leading to economic development. Rather, it's leading to low economic growth, high conflict rates, and weaker democracy. But when we look at it, all these things about resource curse does not really occur. It happens because of some driven economic situations like economic instability, political instability, and corruption. So corruption, economic/political instability makes some countries, especially when you look at African countries, where you have high rate of unrest, crimes, because of natural endowments. So the natural resources they have is bringing to them cost rather than prosperity. And that's what we call resource cost. Yeah, it is noticeable. We hear about it, the diamond blood and the rest of all these things. There, as a result of instability, corruption within the economy, and this has led to different types of violence, crimes. So the natural resources they have, compared to those that are not even those countries that do not have natural resources, those that don't even have are enjoying a better life than those who have natural resources. And that is what we simply call resource cost. So here I wrote, resource cost is a situation whereby countries with abundant resources or that have natural endowments are witnessing low economic growth, high conflict rates, and weaker democracy compared to resource-scarce nations. Oh, country A has oil, but country B does not have oil. And country B is well developed than country A. For every now and then, country A continues to witness violence, witnesses weaker democracy, witnesses low economic growth. And it has resources, it has what it takes to be what it's supposed to be. So that is what resource cost is. Is it clear? So one of the factors that hinder the growth and development of an economy is resource cost, which is through commodities. Commodities can be reliance on exportation, it could be reliance on importation. Some countries rely mostly on imported raw materials to be able to produce finished goods that they would be able to sell. Some countries have natural resources that they want to export to get revenue from. So whatever the case might be, with commodities, there's likelihood that we have what we call resource costs. I think it's clear. Okay. So that's about that. So another factor that hinders the growth or development of an economy is volatility of commodity prices. Fluctuations in commodity prices, we talked about changes here, in commodity prices will cause problems for countries. particularly those developing countries who rely on commodity exports as a significant source of export revenue. The more price inelastic the demand of the commodity, the greater the changes in price are likely to be. Sudden price changes can mean large amount of extra revenue being earned by an economy or large falls in revenue. So this makes it difficult for firms and governments to predict their revenues in the short and long term, which can discourage investment and make it hard for a government to plan economic development. When commodity prices rise over a number of years, there tends to be overinvestment in the production of the commodity. Producers assume that prices will carry on rising or remain the same and can be caught out by large falls in price. The more dependent a country is on commodity exports, particularly one or two commodity exports, the greater the risks there will be large changes in GDP when commodity prices change. Now, let's look at volatility of commodity prices. For commodity prices, they are bound to change based on the fact that there could be external shocks. And when these commodity prices change, it affects countries that mostly rely on two or more commodities. So which simply means they have to spend more than what they have budgeted for. And that might as well even increase their debt, and which discourages them from trying to develop or grow their economy. Do you get the point I'm making here? So countries that mostly rely on commodities for their growth and development might find it difficult and unpredictable when prices continue to fluctuate. They will be caught in between, oh, it might rise tomorrow, or it might fall tomorrow. So if we have to buy so much today, what about if by tomorrow the price falls? So this discourages them from trying to produce, to create something, because the future is unknown to them. So they are always pessimistic about the future. And as a result of that, there's disincentive for them to want to do anything productive. And that hinders their growth and development. So volatility of commodity prices, fluctuations of prices, commodity like oil, copper, whatever it is that we rely on for production. If their prices are not stable, it becomes difficult for those countries that mostly rely on them for production to be able to make a plan or budget. On the other hand, for countries that rely on exports, if the price increases for them, it's good because it increases their revenue. But if the price increases for those countries that rely mostly on importation of these commodities, it means they have to pay more, especially if the price elasticity of demand for such commodity is inelastic. And if it is inelastic, trust me, the price will continue to rise over time because they know that there's nothing consumers will do regarding it. Just like the price of oil now. The price of oil continues to rise over time based on this external shock. But oil is inevitable. So it has a PED that is inelastic. I think it's clear. Yeah. So volatility of commodity prices, which means changes, unpredictable prices of commodities, makes it difficult for an economy to really grow or develop. The third factor that could bring about constraints on growth and development is primary product dependency. I want to talk about primary product dependency. We're simply talking about the raw materials that we extract, but let me read anyway. When commodity prices are declining, the terms of trade for commodity export-dependent countries fall. They can afford to buy fewer goods and services from abroad with the revenues earned from the sale of commodities. The Pribik single hypothesis suggests that over the long run, the prices of commodities will fall compared to all other goods, such as manufactured goods. This suggests that countries with a high export dependency on primary products will experience a continued worsening of their terms of trade. The reason the price of commodities might fall relative to the price of other goods, such as manufactured goods, is based on the different income elasticity of demand between commodity and manufactured goods. So before I go further, when we talk about primary production, we're simply talking about extraction of raw materials. We're simply talking about countries that mostly rely on the primary sector of the economy. So goods sector, the primary sector of the economy is expected to witness a continuous fall in the price of its commodity. Why? Because it is based on income elasticity. People prefer to buy services. People prefer to buy finished goods than buying raw materials. So which simply means the demand for the demand for raw materials is price elastic and income elastic. As a result of that, countries that mostly rely on primary products are vulnerable when it comes to terms of trade. I think it's making sense there.
Yeah.
So commodity export dependent countries will grow relatively poor than other countries. The worsening of the terms of trade will also make it harder for a developing country to generate enough foreign currency from its commodity exports. For its commodity export, revenue to pay for much needed imports, such as capital goods, which may help to achieve higher economic development and growth. Countries that rely. So this is why African countries, they have abundant natural resources. Still, they are wallowing in abject poverty. Why? Because raw materials are subject to elasticity. Compared to, you cannot go to the sea and pick up a fish and eat it like that. It has to be converted. Yes or no? But African countries do not have equipment. They don't have capital goods. They need enough revenue to be able to invest in capital goods that would allow them to be industrialized. But African countries, the revenue they get from primary products is not enough. And you know what? It is cyclical. Developed countries want to ensure that African countries or developing countries do not reach their height. And what can they do? The only way they do it is to negotiate for a cheaper raw material, knowing quite well that African countries cannot use raw materials. They have to rely on the conversion of the raw materials. You can't just extract crude oil and put it into the car. It has to be converted. Yes or no?
Yeah.
So it simply means no matter how much abundance of resources we have in Africa, we still rely on the Western world to convert them into finished products that can be used. So it simply means we are vulnerable to them. They buy at a cheaper rate.
Yeah.
So buying at a cheaper rate does not allow developing countries to have enough revenue to be able to invest in technology, in capital goods that would allow them to continue to stop the reliance on developed countries for the secondary sector. And without the secondary sector, you cannot produce. You can only continue to extract.
I mean, but that's also something the Western countries wouldn't want, right?
They what?
They wouldn't want.
Yeah, they wouldn't. Yeah, that's our weakness, and that is what they use against us. Because as soon as we are able to get all this equipment, all this machinery, all these capital goods, all this sophisticated technology, then it simply means we don't need them. Now they need us more, and that won't happen. Not now.
They wouldn't allow it.
So developing countries, based on the fact that we rely mostly on the primary sector, it makes us vulnerable when we have to sell, because we need to sell to get revenue. So when it comes to we supplying more, it simply means the price continues to fall over time. I think the point is clear.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, whatever the case might be, dependency on the primary products would hinder the growth and development of an economy, because the reliance on primary products simply means we are at the mercy of developed countries to pay us before or to exchange raw materials for finished products. So which simply means they are paying less and we are paying more for importation. So that brings about deficit in our balance of payments, current account. I think the point there is clear. Any question about reliance in the primary product dependence? Okay. Then I think, okay, do we have anything here again? Let me just see. Yeah, they said another problem is what is known as the Dutch disease. Some countries become significant commodity producers in a relatively short space of time. The Netherlands in the 1960s became a significant producer of natural gas. As a result, the Netherlands imported less energy and exported gas. This increased the demand for Dutch currency and reduced supply, leading to a significant rise in the Dutch foreign exchange rate. As a result, Dutch agriculture and manufacturing products became less internationally price competitive, and output in these two sectors fell compared with what it would otherwise have been. If the economic loss from closure of firms is greater than the gain from increased commodity revenues, the economy can become worse off, as a result of the trade in a commodity. The non-oil sector in countries such as Nigeria and Venezuela have suffered because oil exports have increased the value of their currencies. And that aspect of the resource occurs when commodity resources can be controlled by small groups that seek to maximize their own rewards at the expense of the rest of the population. An example might be the development of a gold mine. A transnational mining company wants to develop the mine and maximize its own profit. It therefore wants to pay as little to the government of the country as possible in licenses, fees, and taxes. It also wants to operate the mine as cheaply as possible. So it wants to be able to dispose of waste without worrying about environmental damage. It also wants to be able to recruit local workers at the lowest possible wage rate, preferably without any trade unions being involved. It therefore bribes local government workers and politicians to secure a good deal. The losers are local populations. Despite billions of dollars of commodity being extracted from their countries, they can receive little benefits. Resource curse. Countries have abundant resources. They are at the mercy of multinationals to come with their technology, to come with their equipment, to come with their machines, to convert these resources into finished products. The multinationals understand the weaknesses of developing countries. They understand the they understand the lapses in developing countries. They understand the lack of nepotism. They understand everything about developing countries. So they are coming with their expertise. And what is there for them to do? They exploit workers. They manipulate politicians. They bribe their way through to get good deals. They ensure that the supply of labor is more of monopoly. All these things, they avoid taxes. All these things are at the detriment of the large population who are wallowing in poverty. So that is exactly what we call resource cost. And if these things continue to occur or happen, it simply means the economy cannot see the light of the day. It's not going to grow. We have to talk about development. Because increasing growth, increasing economic growth will lead to economic development. So if the economy is not growing, how would the economy become developed?
I don't know.
So that is resource cost. Any question about that? So for the Dutch disease, it's simply about you ignoring the Dutch in Netherlands, they ignore the primary sector because they ignore farming. They stop thinking about
Because it's vulnerable.
It's vulnerable, and they stop thinking about how they're going to get less on it anyway because the gas is more lucrative compared to agriculture. I think the point is clear there.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the next constraint is, okay. The next one is the saving gap, foreign currency gap, and capital flights. That's another problem here. So they said development economics has a relatively short history. The first major work in this field of economics was done in the 1950s. The most important question which development economists first asked themselves was how an economic growth in an economy be raised. Development economists initially used a widely accepted growth theory of the time called Arodoma growth model. This theory states that investment, saving, and technological change are the key variables in determining economic growth. So for Arodoma, it's all about investment, savings, and technological advancement that will bring about economic growth. So without investment, savings come even before investment. Savings allow you to accumulate enough fund for investment. And when you are investing, you might as well invest in capital goods that will increase your output. So that is what our Doma is talking about, growth model. You save, you invest, then you can increase your output. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So the policy implication of our Doma model are clear. Increasing the rate of economic growth is a simple matter of either increasing the saving ratio in the economy, which will increase the amount of investment, or making technological progress, which will allow more output to be produced from a single unit of that capital. Now, let's look at saving also. How do you think increasing savings would lead to investment? Increasing savings. If savings continue to increase in the country, how can these lead to increasing investment?
Well, where do you save? You save in a bank, right?
Yes.
And the bank uses your money to make money, right?
Okay, money creation, yes.
Yeah. So by saving your money, the bank might actually I don't know. I'm just going around in circles.
Okay, so let me help you finish it up anyway. So savings would lead to increasing investment, and this is how it works. The commercial banks, there's what we call money creation. We call it money creation. It's different from minting and printing money. Money creation, the assumption about money creation is that it is assumed that there's an individual who has a lot of money.
Mhm.
So there's an individual who has a lot of money, but he's scared to keep the money at home.
He
So
puts it in
he
a bank.
starts thinking about a bank. A bank is a financial institution that can safeguard your assets, yes or no? So the individual starts thinking about how his money can be secured. Then he thinks about going to the bank to deposit the money into the bank. That is savings. Now, the bank has received the deposit, which becomes a liability to the bank. So can I make a video for that, please?
Just first, I need to go to the toilet.
Okay, hold on. Let me just pause it. So we'll be right back, please. I'm gonna pause the live now and pause. Just hold on, please. Pausing these two. Okay. So we continue with factors that hinder the growth and development of an economy. Another factor we want to talk about now is saving gap. And for saving, it's about the savings gap, and the savings gap, foreign currency gap, and capital flight. So I'm going to take it one at a time. For the saving gaps, for saving gap, it's simply talking about the difference between the actual savings and the amount of savings needed to achieve economic growth. That is what saving gap is. So it simply means if in an economy, the saving continue to increase over time, it might bring about increasing investment. So my question before now was that how does how does increasing savings bring about increasing investment? And you said individuals would save in the bank, and banks would definitely want to give out loans to borrowers to make money out of it, right? So there is an economic policy for that. We call it money creation. So for money creation, it's simply about how commercial banks are able to create money from depositors or savers. And how does that happen? The first assumption is that there's an individual who has a lot of money. And because this individual has a lot of money, it is not ideal to save a lot of money at home. So you have to start thinking about a safe place to keep your money. And the only safe place to keep your money is the bank, the commercial bank. So the second assumption is that there is a bank waiting for you to bring your money to save. So as soon as you go to the bank to save your money, what happens? Now, the first assumption is that there's an individual who has a lot of money. Now, the individual has thought about saving its money in the bank. Now, there's a bank where you can save your money. That's the second assumption. Now, the third assumption is that there's an individual, there's an entrepreneur, there's an investor who needs that money and he doesn't have it. So he needs to go to the bank because he has collateral, he has other factors of production that he can use as collateral. But the bank would not keep your money because if the bank is keeping your money, it's a liability for the bank. The bank has to make credit out of your money. The bank has to make profit out of your money. So because as soon as you save your money into the bank, it becomes a liability for the bank. And you cannot continue to keep liability. It will not lead to profit. So the bank is waiting for that individual who is low risk that needs to borrow from the bank. So as soon as you save your money to the bank will give your money out to a borrower, which the bank is certain that it's going to pay back and with interest. And that is how commercial banks would be able to, create money. So if you are saving $500 into the bank, the $500 will be given to certain individual who might pay 10% as interest on $500. So 10% of $500 is 5. Is it 50? 50. So the bank will be getting 550 from your 500. So the bank has created additional 50 from your 500. So that is how commercial banks create money. So for that individual, that is why the more savings, the higher the saving ratio, the higher the investment ratio. So a lot of people save money into the bank. So if saving continue to increase in the country, it makes credit accessible for borrowers who would want to invest. So that takes us to how there will be constraints when savings is reduced. And one of the constraints regarding savings is what we call the saving gap. And what do I call saving gap? I said saving gap is the difference between the actual saving and the required savings that would lead to economic growth. So if the actual saving is not enough, is not what is required to reach economic growth, the economy would not grow. So there might be saving in the economy, but if the saving is not what is needed to achieve economic growth, the economy will not grow and the economy will not develop. Because increasing economic growth would lead to economic development. Do we understand saving gap here? So saving gap can be an hindrance to economic growth and economic development. That's about that. So I would want that to be that saving gap, right?
And just send it.
Yeah, you can send the saving gaps and money creation and money creation. Saving gaps and money creation.
Did I send the previous one?
Did you? I think so. If not, I don't know. You can check. So that's about saving gap. Are you sending it or we'll continue then?
Okay, let's get to afterwards.
Okay then. I won't forget this time around anyway. So that's about saving gap, which is one factor that might hinder the growth of an economy. And I explained how a saving gap might hinder the growth of an economy. An economy needs a lot of savings. And if there is a saving gap simply means the difference between the actual saving witnessed in an economy and the required savings needed for that economy to achieve its growth. That's about saving gap. Then the second factor is the second one is foreign currency gap. For foreign currency gap, this is when exports from a developing country are too low compared to imports to finance the purchase of investment or other goods from overseas required for faster economic growth. So if import is exceeding exports in an economy, that means there's a foreign currency gap. You have to do more of exports to achieve more revenue, to attain more revenue. But if you are doing more of imports than exports, you are creating a foreign currency gap because it simply means you need more of other countries' currency. And that would not allow you to reach or to attain economic growth. And if you cannot attain economic growth, you can't attain or achieve economic development. I think that point is clear.
Yes.
And the last one is capital flight. When we talk about capital flight, we're simply talking about individuals, instead of saving in Libya, they start thinking about savings outside of Libya. That's capital flight. So here I'm going to read. There can be capital flight. This is when savings are sent abroad by citizens and firms of one country to another country, which is either seen as being more secure or where the money can be hidden from government authorities. Foreign aid can be appropriated by local elites through bribery and corruption, or it can be used to finance arms purchases rather than used for productive investment. Also, when opportunities for small-scale profitable investment projects arises, households will increase their savings to invest. I hope I'm not missing anything. Okay. Households will increase their saving to invest. Farmers, for example, will save more if they know that investing in more productive seeds or a new piece of equipment will be profitable. So another factor that hinders the growth of an economy is capital flight. And one of the reasons why we have capital flight, can I make a video for that? Okay. So another factor that hinders economic growth is capital flight. I want to talk about capital flight. We're simply talking about using Libya as a case study. So a lot of Libyans find it safer for them to save, to take their money out of Libya to save in other banks abroad. That is what capital flight is. And when capital flight occurs, it simply means a lot of money is leaving the country. A lot of money is leaving the currency. And it simply means that a lot of dinars, taking Libya as an example now, as a case study, it simply means a lot of Libyan dinars will be in the foreign exchange market looking for foreign currencies. So that means the supply of Libyan dinars will continue to rise over time. And because the supply of Libyan dinars continue to rise over time, based on the fact that there's capital flight, it reduces the value of the dinars. And one of the reasons why Libyans or any citizen might want to might feel safe, might think of being safe, saving its money abroad, might be because it wants to, money laundering, it wants to illegal dealings and whatever it is. It's just an illegal way of, keeping your money out of government sites, bypassing the law. So a lot of capital flight means a lot of money are leaving your shore. And if a lot of money are leaving your shore, it simply means you won't be able to grow or develop because you need money to grow. And when there is not enough revenue to finance investments, investment will lead to growth. And without investment leading to growth, there won't be development. So that's about capital flight. I think capital flight is clear. And the last thing here they said, also when opportunities for small-scale profitable investment project arises, households will increase their savings to invest. And for you to increase your investment, the first thing you have to do is to save. And that is what our Doma is talking about. You save, then you invest, then after investment, then you increase your output. And that is how economic growth would lead to economic development. I think it's clear. So the more the higher the savings within an economy, the greater the investment could be, leading to economic growth and economic development. I think that is clear. So this is about capital flights. Thank you. That's the last video of that anyway. So another factor that would hinder the growth of an economy or development of an economy is demographic factors. And when we talk about demographic factors, we're simply talking about probably population. And let's see anyway. It said the changing structure of the population and its rate of growth can be important for development. In many countries across the world, the population is aging. This means the proportion of workers to dependents, people who need another person to provide money, food, clothes, etc., is falling. With fewer workers, it will be hard to generate more output in the economy. This limits economic growth and makes development harder. Although aging populations are thought to be mostly an advanced economic problem, a growing number of developing countries are also facing the challenges of aging population. Aging populations place pressure on parts of the economy that serve the need of the elderly, such as health systems. They also increase the dependency ratio. This is likely to mean that those who do work pay higher taxes. Now, demographics. Another factor that could hinder the growth and development of an economy is demographics. And when we talk about demographics, we're simply talking about the population. So, and the most difficult situation when it comes to demographic is aging population, because with an aging population, productivity is expected to fall. And if productivity continues to fall, if an economy is witnessing, like Japan, they are witnessing they are witnessing aging population at a large proportion, and that the fear is, how will Japan be within the next 20, 30 years with increasing aging population? So with aging population, it simply means the workforce population is reducing. And if the workforce population is reducing, it simply means output is expected to fall, because output is about, like, productivity is about output and input. So the workers that are expected to work are getting older. And because they're getting older, they won't have that strength to increase their output, and productivity is expected to fall. So an aging population may increase the dependency ratio. And if it increases the dependency ratio, it might as well increase government expenditure when it comes to social benefits or welfare payments, especially if it comes to taking care of the elderly ones. So government will be spending more and receiving less. And because government is receiving less, based on the fact that the population is aging, it simply means government might as well finance its spending through borrowing, and that would as well increase national debt. And a country that has an increasing national debt would have no reason to want to spend on investments to achieve economic growth, not to talk of economic development. Do you get that?
Yeah.
What happens here? It's charging. There we go. That's weird. What happens? Okay. Sorry.
I need to go on the charger.
Okay. Yeah, what happens here? Oh, sorry, guys. Okay, we'll continue now. That's okay, it's still fine. Guys, just give me some few minutes. As soon as my student comes back in, we're going to continue. And I hope you're enjoying the lesson. It's all about economic growth and economic development and the reasons why an economy or economies, mostly developing countries in Africa, why it's difficult for them to expand or why it's difficult for them to grow, not to talk of developing, because development is about the quality of output. Growth is about the quantity of output. You need the quantity to put together to get the quality. So if we are unable to get our quantity, we won't be able to think about achieving quality. And that is the point about that. Okay. So, okay, there's a spot for you, right? Okay. So development tends to be linked with demography. The lower the level of development, the higher tends to be the birth rate. Young populations can be dynamic. However, there's a large burden on the education system to provide education and training for such a large number of young people. There also tends to be large amounts of unemployment and underemployment because economies cannot provide enough jobs for the large numbers of young people joining the working population. If a developing economy has a rapidly growing population, it is likely to have a large number of children as a percentage of the population. This will increase the dependency ratio, limiting the ability of households to save and worsen the problem of saving gap. Now, we've talked about aging population. The problem regarding aging population is that they cannot be active as they used to be. And as a result, economic growth would reduce, making it difficult for government to continue to make revenue through taxes because people they are out of work. Now they need government help. So government will be spending more than what it's receiving in terms of tax revenue. That would limit economic growth and development. Now, for low level, for economies that has a large proportion of their population as younger people, the problem about that is that
Like Nigeria.
like Nigeria, yes. The problem about that is, thank you. The problem about it is that education is expensive, and that's why education is expensive in Nigeria. The population is young, yes. But there's increasing unemployment, there's increasing underemployment in Nigeria. And why is it so? It's so because every year that passes by, countless of people continue to be part of the labor market, while the labor market is not still free from those that are unemployed. So the numbers of unemployed continue to rise over time. So the pressure is on the government to ensure that, to cater. Now, government has to think about making education affordable. And making education affordable is not the only thing. As soon as you make education affordable, you have to start thinking about increasing unemployment population, which government has to also reduce. So these things has to be taken care of. And if government has to take care of all these things, it might as well have to spend more than what it has.
Mm-hmm.
So spending more than what it has might hinder the growth of the economy. So Nigeria is in a situation where you can't even explain how we can go out of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Unemployment is just the order of the day. A lot of people are unemployed.
Yeah.
A lot of people are unemployed. And every year that passes by, a lot of people graduate from university, going to the labor market. And the labor market is already filled with those who don't even have jobs. So unemployment is an order of the day. And that is a factor that hinders the growth of a country. I think that point is clear there. Yeah. So another factor we're going to talk about is debts. For debt, we're talking about foreign currency debt was a major problem. Now they said, I'm going to read and explain. Foreign currency debt was a major problem for many developing countries in the 1980s and 1990s. In the 1970s, the governments of developing countries were encouraged by banks to borrow US dollars at low rates of interest. The early 1980s, however, saw a rise in the value of the US dollar against other currencies and a rise in the interest rate. It left the governments of many developing countries paying substantially more in their own local currency simply to pay the interest on their foreign currency loans. One response was to borrow more money to keep up with interest payments. However, in 1982, the government of Mexico defaulted on its debts. It refused to make further payments on its debt. Banks took fright and became reluctant to lend to many developing countries. This third world debt crisis led to poor developing countries paying more in interest and debts to banks in developed countries than they received in loans and foreign aid. Money was therefore flowing from poor countries to rich countries, the opposite of to what was needed for economic development. So before I go further, the strength of the dollar started in the 80s. In the 70s, 80s, when we can as well borrow with dollar. So a lot of developing countries were encouraged to borrow through the US dollar. So the demand for the US dollar continued to rise as a result of that. And that makes the US dollar become inevitable. But to pay back, they could not keep up with the dollar rate. So they have to pay with their own currency. And what does that simply mean? A lot of developing countries' currency start going into the market, seeking for the dollars. And that starts devaluing the currencies of developing countries. Do you get the point there?
Yeah.
So until date, we continue to have, that is why it's difficult for developing countries to have a better exchange rate compared to the dollar or the euros. Because a lot of money has to leave for the foreign exchange market, seeking for the dollar, seeking for the euro, seeking for the pounds. I think it's clear. So African countries, developing countries have to pay a lot of debts. They have to service the debt, they have to pay interest. And paying interest increases your deficit, and your deficit will also as well increase your national debt. So a lot of money is leaving. And because a lot of money is leaving, it simply means there's not enough money to achieve economic growth, not to talk of economic development. Because for you to achieve economic growth and economic development, money must not leave. Money should be saved. So the opposite is the case here. So you need money to be saved to achieve development. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So the debt crisis was resolved by a combination of measures. Debt was written off or reduced. Economic growth in developing countries reduced the ratio of debt payment to GDP, and so debt repayment became more affordable. Rising efforts in developing countries released foreign currency to repay debt. The debt crisis, however, slowed economic development in countries that were badly affected. The money that was borrowed was all too often wasted by governments. That's another problem. Institutional structure, government. Rather than governments to think about the population, to think about the people, they think about mostly their own self-interest. So at the detriment of the people. So some of it was simply taken by elites through corruption. Some of it was very badly invested in projects which gave little or no economic return. They commenced projects that would never finish. All because they want money to be tied down on that project to be able to siphon the money. Some of it was spent on weapons. It wasn't until the early 2000s that many countries resolved their debt problem through fast economic growth. Borrowing money to finance economic growth should in theory make sense. Firms, for example, borrow money to finance their day-to-day activities and their investment plans. If the private sector in developing countries is borrowing money to finance its growth, this should increase the productive potential of the economy. Recent history suggests that the problem with debt in developing countries occurred when government took on the debts and they spent the money badly. Developing countries do not have problems. They have bad governance. So IMF will give you loan, yes, because you need it for development, because development would bring about return on investment. But this money, when being given, what do they use it for? They use it for re-election. They use it to fund their own lifestyles. And who pays back? The individuals. You want to go?
Yeah.
Okay, just hold on, please. So, whatever is happening here is just the situation that we are witnessing with our own eyes too. So, rising household debts is an increasing concern among many developed economies. So, for developing economies, the problem they have is bad governance, and that makes it difficult for them to be able to fund growth and development. Now, let's look at developed economies. What's the problem about developed economies? Rising household debts. Rising household debt is an increasing concern among many developed economies. For example, in the 2017, the Bank of England raised concerns about consumer credit. Lenders had competed aggressively lowering interest rates in all forms of borrowing and offering interest-free periods on credit cards. The bank was worried about the number of highly indebted households. If their income were squeezed, they would cut back their spending to keep up with their debt repayment. This would constrain growth. They might also default on their loans, which could put banks at risk. Household debt is also rising in emerging economies, but on average is significantly lower than in the advanced economies. Although borrowing by consumers can drive short-run actual growth. If debt grows too large and incomes do not rise fast enough, this will hold back consumption in the future. Now, for developed economies. The problem about developed economies is that they take too much of credit. Too much of what?
Credit.
Too much of credit. They don't deliberately take too much of credit. Financial institutions makes credit availability accessible. So they make credit to be more cheaper for them. So that's why they said they competed aggressively. So banks in the UK gave credit almost for free, knowing fully well that there's a bailout, unquote. There's a bailout. And government will bail them out anyway. Banks are too big to fail. On the other hand, if they are strict in borrowing, it will bring about constraints in the economy because money needs to flow within the economy. So it's a win-win situation for them, but debt will continue to rise over time. So the point is, for developed economies, because they have access to credit, it allows them to grow, but increases their debts, especially in the private sector. And the debts in the private sector, mostly for financial institutions, are paid back by the government. So which simply means whatever happens from the private sector, their failure is being cleared by the government. And government does this with what? Taxpayers' money. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So that's about developed countries. Developed countries don't have problems about governance. They have problems about increasing credit of households, which is, a deliberate attempt of banks wanting to have more customers. And to have more customers, they have to make credit available to attract customers. I think it's clear. So another factor we need to talk about is access to credit and banking. So access to credit and banking is also a factor that might hinder the growth and development of an economy. So let's read. Are you there? Okay. In developed countries, individuals, firms, and governments have access to sophisticated financial systems that allow them to save money with interest and to borrow money. Equally, there are systems for buying shares in companies. There are banks, stock markets, and insurance companies, for example. The poorer the developing country, the less likely it is that individuals and businesses will have access to such financial institutions and markets. For example, the World Bank put the credit gap for small but formal businesses in developing countries at around $1 trillion in 2011. Include informal firms, and credit gap is even greater. A lack of access to credit and banking restricts development because financial institutions provide ways to save now and spend in the future or to borrow now and pay back in the future at a reasonable cost. Without this, poor families can resort to loan sharks to borrow money. Loan sharks are more money lenders who charge very high interest rates and lend to those who typically have bad debt records. Loan sharks also tend to threaten borrowers with violence if they cannot repay their debts. Interest rates are punitive and often leave individuals permanently in debt. A banking system that is accessible to all is therefore important for economic development, and for many economies, the lack of such a system is a constraint on growth and development. The absence of a fully functioning banking system might also constrain growth for more developed economies. The global financial crisis made credit scarce for countries such as the UK and the United States. This reduced investment and consumption. A report in 2018 said that access to bank finance in the EU had fallen since the crisis. The financing available to EU companies as a proportion of GDP had also fallen. Now, access to bank, access to credit and banking. The ability to have access to credit and banking lies on the banking system. A banking system that is functioning would make credit accessible. A banking system that is functioning would allow people to save now, to spend later, would allow people to borrow now and pay back later. So there are two things here. If the banking system is functioning, people can save now to invest later. If the banking system is functioning, people can borrow now and pay back later. So your ability to save now, invest later, your ability to borrow now and pay back later will determine how much the economy would grow. Does it make sense here?
Yeah.
So if the banking system is not working, there won't be economic growth because there won't be any way to develop through investment, to develop through savings, to develop through borrowing. And that is the problem most developing countries have. They don't have a functioning banking system. And lack of a functioning banking system hinders the growth and development of these developing countries. I think the point is clear there. Now, education and skills. Are you there? I think that's the last factor. No, there are more.
There's stuff.
No, the impact of non-economic factor. So the last one is education and skills. So the last factor that could hinder the growth and development of an economy is education and skill. Developing countries have made great progress in getting children into school. Although the majority of the children are now in primary school, there are still some 260 million children in the world not attending primary or secondary school. Even though the rate of children going to primary school is now generally low, right? High. The quality of education is often poor. Those who attend school still lack basic numeracy and literacy skills. Poor quality education can have many causes. Clearly, government of developing countries will have fewer resources per capita than more developed ones to invest in education. However, countries with similar income per capita levels often have different learning outcomes for children. This might be explained by poor management and governance on the education system. And this will take us to the difference between good teachers and bad teachers, and good management too. Let's see anyway. However, this might be explained by poor management and governance on the education system. In some countries, teacher absence is high, teacher training is low. If parents perceive that there is little to gain from education, they may choose to keep children at home. The opportunity cost of sending children to school is often high. The school system. The school system can also be a reason why an economy ceases to be developed or grow. Poor management will lead to having bad teachers or having absent teachers. Some teachers want to be there, but a poor management discourages them. So people might as well not even want to pick up a teaching job because the treatment of teachers maybe are poor. And if there are no teachers in the schools to teach students, how would they acquire this knowledge and skills needed for the growth of the economy? So for an economy to grow, it needs to invest more in the educational system. And not just the educational system, unquote, in depth towards the teachers, because the teachers are the lifeblood of the educational system. Does it make sense there, please? So the growth of developed economies is also constrained by skills gap, which exists in their economies. With fast-moving technological advances, structural unemployment can exist at the same time as job creation. Skills needed by the working population can change quickly over time, which means education and training must be adequately funded. A working population with low or out-of-date skills will reduce innovation in the economy and restrict labor mobility. All this will reduce potential growth. Back to training. Training improves the skills and knowledge of individual, and that makes them to be more flexible and adaptable. But an economy and these days, the skills required are dynamic. Before you know it, something else, you need to attain something else to get somewhere else. So which simply means government of a country must always make sure it must always make available training facility that would, update the skills and know-how of citizens. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So these are the constraints of economic growth and development. We talked about debt, we talked about saving gap, we talked about education and training, we talked about corruption. What else did we talk about? We talked about the banking system and many more. So now we're going to the impact of non-economic factors. All we've talked about are economic factors. Now I want to talk about what?
Not non-economic.
Yeah, we want to talk about non-economic factors. So for non-economic factors, the first one I'm going to talk about, they are deliberate factors, which simply means they are something that we deliberately start doing. The first one is corruption. Individuals and businesses are less willing to buy machinery, build factories, or establish brands if powerful individuals or organizations within the state can effectively steal those assets. When government officials steal assets, this is corruption, dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, often involving bribery. Where corruption is widespread, it is often better to seek positions where you can receive large amounts of bribes than ones where there is a genuine output of goods and services. In authoritarian regimes, corruption tends to be particularly severe and widespread. Those in power use their positions to enrich themselves, their families, or their ethnic group. Equally, corruption can be present in democracies. For example, there is widespread corruption in India. So before we go further, corruption becomes part of the system. And because it becomes part of the system, every individual that have the opportunity to be in an office will prefer to be in that place where corruption is rampant. Instead of thinking about leaving that place where corruption is rampant, to go to where you will be accountable, they wouldn't want to go there. Do you understand? So that simply means corruption will continue to increase over time. Corruption may lead to tax evasion, as individuals may avoid paying taxes when this money is not spent properly. This reduces funds for investment in health, education, and other components of government spending. Government spending crucial for development and growth. When there's corruption, you evade tax, which simply means it is good for you to pay small amount of money to bribe government officials, not to pay a huge amount on tax. Bribing them simply means less revenue for the country. Less revenue for the country increases its deficit and it increases its national debt.
Okay.
Corruption also leads to inefficiency in an economy. If those running the government and firms are not the best candidate for the job, the impact on reducing investment, both domestic and foreign direct investment, also constrain growth and development. We talked about this yesterday. When you put square pegs in a round hole, you are putting individuals who are not fit for the job to do the job. They would not make the right decision. Not that they are bad, but you can't give what you don't have. So they don't have the know-how to understand what that office entails. So it is expected of them to just do whatever they want. Do you get it?
Yeah.
And how is that possible? It is possible because they bribe their way through that. Corruption can be significant constraint economists as PricewaterhouseCoopers, this is PwC, this is in Nigeria, conducted by 2030, the size of Nigerian economy should triple in real terms. Yet, if Nigeria manages to reduce corruption to levels similar to Malaysia, its economy could be some 37% bigger still. Corruption is the order of the day. Nigeria's problem is not lack of resources, it's not even population, but bad governance through corruption. And not until corruption is reduced to the minimum, we would not witness economic growth. Yeah, we are witnessing economic growth, we would not witness development. And that's what PwC is saying there too. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So corruption is a non-economic factor because it does not involve activity. It's a deliberate act, mostly by politicians. So go to poor governance. That's another issue. Growth and development are promoted by good governance and the rule of law. And when we talk about rule of law, we're simply talking about the supremacy of the law. Where the rule of law is weak, there's often what makes the rule of law to be weak? When they say the rule of law is weak, what does that simply mean?
Some people are above the law.
Thank you. It means some people are above the law. So if some people are above the law, it simply means they can find their way, they can, whatever they do, nobody's going to hold them. Nobody's going to hold them accountable for it. So too much bureaucracy and regulations can also be a result of poor governance. In some countries, it is very costly and time-consuming to set up a legal business because of the bureaucracy and regulation involved. Arbitrary application of tax laws can also discourage business activity. Red tape is another factor that hinders the growth of an economy. If government laws are too much, that means they are too tight, firms will be discouraged to want to set up in such country. And if firms are not setting up in a country, how will the output of that country increase? No way. And if the output is not increasing, if the quantity is not increasing, we cannot talk about the quality increasing. I think poor governance is clear. Yeah. The next one, civil wars. When the country continue to fight, citizens continue to fight themselves. Destruction, inflation, poverty. This would rather put the PPF inward than outward. Civil wars. One major cause of negative development in war is war. Countries such as Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan have paid a very heavy price in recent years for continued war that have destroyed both physical and human capital. The long-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, and the PP will shift inward, like I said earlier. Real GDP will fall as economic activity is disrupted. For example, the Yemeni civil war began in 2015, and economic growth that year was negative 28%. According to the World Bank, conflicts reduce GDP by 2% points per year. On average, however, some countries will be significantly negatively impacted. For example, from 2011 until 2016, the total losses in GDP in Syria have been estimated at $226 billion. Yes, please.
Well, Mr.
Hi, sir.
Tell me,
Yeah.
the last
Chapter, is it the last chapter?
Okay.
So that's about civil war. Civil war would rather reduce your GDP, pull your PPF inward, and shift your long-run aggregate supply curve leftward. That is what war will do. And whatever shift your PPF inward, whatever bring about a leftward shift in your aggregate supply curve to left would bring about economic decline. And economic decline would not lead to economic development. Clear. The next one is migration. Migration also occurs for non-economic reasons, such as those fleeing dangerous political conditions or war. Migration flows might also change for political reasons rather than economic ones. For example, when the UK leaves the EU, that's British exit, there's likely to be less flow of migrants between the UK and the EU. So when you look at constraints of growth and development, the country mentioned mostly here in Africa is what? The country mentioned most here,
Nigeria.
So Nigeria is a country that has a lot of potentials, but bad governance, corruption. Nigeria is not growing, not because of economical reasons. Nigeria is not growing because of non-economical reasons. And that's why we continue to surface constantly on this topic. It is what it is. So this will impact negatively on economic growth for the UK. So that's about migration. And for migration, it's simply talking about, for me, when it comes to migration, I see more of brain drain. So a lot of people leave developing countries because that country is not giving them, they won't reach their potentials and they have to leave. So a country with more migration or more migrants are likely to, it's likely to have increase in output leading to economic development. I think it's clear. Now, the next non-economical factor is terrorism. I hope Nigeria is not mentioned there. Oh, it's mentioned again. Terrorism. According to the Global Terrorism Index, the cost of terrorism to the world was 52.9 billion in 2014. The 10 countries most affected by terrorism saw decreased GDP growth rates by between 0.51 and 0.8%. One impact of terrorism is that it reduced foreign direct investment inflows for developing countries. In Nigeria, it was estimated that terrorism caused FDI inflows to fall by 6.1 billion in 2010. Terrorism has also caused problems for those countries that rely heavily on tourism as a strategy for growth and development. However, individual terrorist incidents are likely to have a similar impact than long-term terrorism problems. Terrorism. It reduces inflow of FDI. A lot of foreign direct investment would want to leave. They want to be safe. They don't just want to be kidnapped by a so-called terrorist to ask for a ransom. They will leave your country. They would not be your country would not be a place of economic attractiveness to them. And for every terrorism incident, it's likely to have a long-term impact on the economy. So that's about terrorism. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
Then other constraints. I think that's the last note.
Yeah.
Diseases such as HIV/AIDS and malaria continue to have a heavy impact on affected countries. Geographical location is also important. Economic growth in China has been much faster in coastal regions, which easier access to ports for exported goods than inland. Landlocked countries such as Bolivia or Uganda have a natural economic disadvantage compared to countries with access to sea routes. There are also gender issues, which constrain economic growth and development for some countries. In many countries, for example, girls complete fewer years of schooling than boys, so they build up less human capital. High mortality rates from childbirth are also a problem faced by women in poor developing countries. Economic development, therefore, needs to address gender issues. And for gender issues, we're simply talking about women participation rates. And women participation rate is hindered with women involvement in education. So when females are not educated, it reduces their opportunity to secure a job. Do you understand the point here?
Yeah.
So gender inequality needs to be addressed because it reduces GDP from what it could otherwise be. Also, in terms of bringing up children, the more educated the mother, the more likely it is that her children will be educated to a similar standard. So if women are not educated, they might not see the good thing about education. And because they don't see the good thing in education, they are convinced that education is not a success. So that's why they said the more likely, the more educated the mother is, the more likely the children are educated to at least to her own standard. You get it? So these are economic and non-economic factors that hinders economic growth and economic development. And on this note, we're going to end the class. But we have to understand that economic growth and economic development mostly are not, the hindrances are not economical. To me, for me, with what I've seen, with what I have known, and from where I'm coming from, which I'm going to use Nigeria as a case study. Nigeria lack of development or growth is not simply about economical issues. It's more of non-economical issues, which I can highlight: poor governance, corruption, migration, civil war, terrorism. And all these things, if they are being taken care of, I can assure you that Nigeria would be a developed economy. Thank you. And for everyone, cheers and bye.